What's up, nerds? It's Havoc, and we're back with version 2 of our UK Forces battle group and unit tier list. You guys will notice I have one of these videos up already, but after some feedback from basically everybody watching my videos and saw the longer form versions of the Wehrmacht, the DAC, and the US forces, I thought it suitable to revisit UK forces to discuss some things in a bit more detail, dive a little bit deeper into the battle groups and their respective units, as well as abilities and break those down, talk about tech structure, and some other information as well. So, if you're tuning in for the first time, that's great because you will have missed the first one that has a little bit less information. And again, this one, we're not going to pay too much attention to time. We're just going to power through everything there is to say about UK forces, and there's a lot to say. And we're going to jump into it. So, throughout this video, just going to kind of set the precedent as I did in previous ones. So just looking at the buildings and the tech structures, we're going to work our way progressively through the UK Forces tech structures first. Then we're going to follow with the battle group breakdowns as well as their units. They're going to be categorized as well. You guys will also notice I've added another tier here called OK in between OK and bad. I got some feedback that there was a little too many things piling up in strong. And not enough kind of things in average and bad. So I'm going to try to differentiate a little bit better between the things that I feel like are really strong and the things that are just average. And this okay category, some things will fall into that, but maybe not quite to the bad levels. Anyway, with that, we're also going to break down the tech structures. So henceforth, headquarters will be known as Tier 0. Section command post is Tier 1. Platoon command post is tier 2, and company command post is tier 3. And with that, we'll get started with tier 0. And from tier 0, you can build Sappers and the Vickers HMG. So starting with Sappers, these guys are easily the strongest combat engineer unit in the game. They are expensive relative to some of the other engineer units. They are definitely the most expensive. And they can be beat out by a handful of engineer units in a handful of different circumstances. But overall, Sappers, very, very strong short-range unit. I did actually want to break down and compare the difference between Sappers at close range and some other, like, very commonly seen CQC units. So with that, we'll pull up the Sappers, and I do want to compare them to things like Panzer Grenadiers. You can see here, Sappers, very, very high short-range DPS, even when compared to assault units like Panzer Grenadiers. We can also look at Assault Grenadiers here to see the relative damage difference. Assault Grenadiers obviously having the leg up here, not just in damage, but also in health pool. But once your Sappers start to get some veterancy, as well as infantry training, they can go toe-to-toe with a lot of these units with the proper support. And for that reason, you know, the Sappers kind of double as an assault troop or an assault unit, especially in the early game. And they do get more durable over the course of the game. Once they get to Vet 3, you get access to the 5th man as a part of the Sapper squad, which just makes them that much better. And you can see it puts them almost on par with the Assault Grenadiers. However, the Assault Grenadiers are going to get better combat veterancy over the course of the game compared to Sappers. But overall, like, very strong CQC unit. And the way that you want to be using these guys generally is aggressive in the early game, but they act much better as the game goes from super early to like mid early. And by mid early, I mean like the 3 to 5 minute mark. After you've done your initial push, and like if you can catch out some units in 1v1 situations, there are opportunities to win those engagements. I mean, they will crush, absolutely, they will crush Pioneers. They will be able to rush down Panzer Pioneers that are not supported by combined arms or any kind of vehicle. And then if they get the jump on units in CQC by hiding around a corner or popping out of a building, can very easily take on Grenadiers, Panzer Grenadiers, and other early game early game units. But what these guys work much better for is supporting your Tommies in the early game, or whatever kind of range unit you've decided to go for. It could be Tommies, it could be Aussies, or supporting your HMG. But basically, like, most of the Axis units want to close the gap against Tommies in the early game, and we'll talk that a little bit more when we talk about infantry section. By the way, sorry, they're the same thing. The Tommies are also the infantry section. But they act much better as a protection deterrent for closing the gap on infantry sections. Because if your opponent comes at you with grenadiers or with pioneers or panzer grenadiers or whatever, they can come in and deal high amount of CQC DPS and take a lot of the threat away from your sections, which is going to allow them to be at their optimal range, which is long range. And forcing your opponent to play at long range against sections is generally always going to be a losing trade for them. Now, you'll notice they actually have a pretty good capture multiplier. This was added in more recent patches because UK forces, obviously one of their weaknesses in the early game is territory capture speed and tempo. And this is most present in 1v1s and 2v2s. But with this capture multiplier, that kind of softened the blow a little bit of going for early game Royal Engineer choice. And so overall, like, this unit, super, super strong. Comes with some great upgrades through some of the different battle groups, which we'll talk about. But bar none, like, this is hands down the best CQC engineer unit in the game, hands down. These guys can actually, in most circumstances, they can also 2 against 1 versus pioneers. The exception to that would be if the Wehrmacht player has gone officer quarters and has Vet 1 pioneers. They get a little bit of received accuracy bonus, and they're not able to 2v1 in that situation. But if you run 2 squads of pioneers into the Sapper, you can be confident that the Sapper will be pretty much able to hold their ground against both of those regardless. I like to build 2 of these guys generally in 1v1s and 2v2s. In bigger team games, I'm generally not building another Sapper until later. Obviously, because you're going to be dealing with a lot more long-range engagements, and you don't have to worry as much about capturing a lot of territory in the early game. But the double Sapper opener is one of the most common ones that you'll see for high-level UKF players. And it's also going to give you the option in the later game, as it progresses, to have 1 dedicated to a flamethrower role and assault role, and 1 dedicated to sweeping mines with the hazard removal package. So, for that reason, Sappers going to go up in the strong category, very close to OP as far as like individual like engineer units go. But they do have that you are able to kite them in the early game. They can be kited by a lot of the line units, like a grenadier. If you catch these guys at max range, as long as you're stepping back in between volleys of fire against the Sappers, you can deter them from pushing in and killing you. And like I mentioned, they are by far the most expensive engineer unit as well, so that is why they are in the strong category for now. That takes us to the Vickers. Now, the Vickers, as far as machine guns go, has some great veterancy and great options. It has a very unique identity compared to the other machine guns. If I'm not mistaken, it has, generally speaking, the worst suppression profile. The MG34, the 42, and the American 30 cal and 50 cals are much better at suppression. But Vickers has very nice long-range damage, and when coupled with the Veterancy 1 ability, this can do some really, really nice damage to units at max range. It will do the job of suppression, obviously, just not quite as well as those other machine guns that I mentioned. So for that reason, I'm actually going to put it in the average category. Now, I do want to jump into the Vickers unit and talk a little bit about why it scales so well, and the dynamic that is brought in with the synergy with team weapon training. So you'll notice the veterancy ability that they have here is focus gunnery. This adds extra range and vision range, but it reduces the firing arc by 50% when the unit is set up. and it's going to reduce the overall suppression. In this case, it means removes area suppression. So it's only going to be able to knock down and pin to the ground one target at a time. But this ability is very nice because it will match the range with things like the Flak 30. So you can kind of poke away at the Flak 30 with the Vickers from maximum range if you're using the Focus Gunnery ability. I'm actually curious. I wanted to see really quickly, what is the range of the Flak 30? If I'm not mistaken, I think 5. Oh, it is. There we go. Sorry, it's this one. Okay, so this has 50 range. We compare it to the Vickers here. Vickers machine gun has 45. And you can see now, once you stack another 10 range on top from Focus Gunnery, you're actually able to outrange the Flak 30. The Flak 30 needs to move a little bit closer in order to get shots off at the Vickers, which is really, really nice. Because if you're able to keep it at a distance or keep it busy with maybe a section squad or something that's in cover, kind of taking the damage, the Vickers is going to be able to chip away at it from long range using that Focus Gunnery ability. The Vickers has also some really unique and interesting veterancy options in terms of what it gets access to in the late game. It's not showing, the veterancy isn't properly reflected here, but at Vet 3, actually I might be looking at the wrong Vickers team. That could be why. Let's just, could be this one. No, not the one correct either. So at Vet 3, the Vickers has an increased arc. I think it's by about 15%. Here we go, 10%, sorry. Weapon arc radius. These kind of look reversed, actually, a little bit. Well, this one should be down here. I know that for sure. Anyway, the Vickers has an increased arc, which is really, really nice. It also stacks on top of Focus Gunnery. So if you use Focus Gunnery once you get to Vet 3 as well, it will have almost the same arc as a regular machine gun, not quite as wide. But it's still very, very effective. So yeah, generally, situations that you want to build this, I don't often default to the Vickers. I know some people prefer to because of that really nice long-range damage profile. On maps with highly concentrated areas, this can be a great tool to keep your enemies at a distance. And of course, on large open maps where your enemy's doing a lot of blobbing, like these could be great units to reactively build. But generally, my preference personally is just a little more section heavy. I like the extra mobility and the scaling from the sections. And I just think, you know, they're going to perform better over a long game. Whereas the Vickers is really great, though, if your opponent's doing a really good job of keeping their units consolidated, doing a lot of blobbing, and you're finding yourself trading down in a lot of engagements, this can be a great response to help you deal with that and help them from closing the gap and also deter the blobbing that your opponent might be doing. So for that reason, I'm going to put Vickers in average category as far as machine guns go. It lacks some of the really excellent aspects of the other machine guns, like the high damage of the MG42, as well as the suppression profile. Doesn't quite have the same protection as the American 30 cal and 50 cals do from their passive damage reduction. But overall, like, fulfills the role and is a solid choice. That takes us to the infantry section. So infantry section, bar none, best line unit in the game by far. We'll do some quick comparisons of the infantry section against other line units from the early game, just so you guys can see kind of what the difference is between Tommy Squad and some of its counterparts. So you'll notice here, for example, against the Grenadier, effectively winning at all ranges outside of very short range. And it's pretty difficult for Grenadiers to catch sections out at short range because generally when you're doing pushing, you're leading with section, you're going to catch your opponent at long range. And if Grenadiers try to close the gap on this as well, they will also get crushed by the Tommy section. So I think like a couple things to call out about the Tommy. First, you'll notice, and I've talked about this in other videos as well, they're one of very few units in the game that have a almost completely flat damage curve. If you'll look at most other units in the game, they tend to have a declining damage curve, which makes sense, right? You're more accurate at close range. Your rate of fire might be a little bit higher. And so they are much better though. Generally speaking, at long range, you can see the decline on their damage curve is much more flat and more consistent. Even comparing them to units like Jaegers, for example, you can see even the Jaegers have a pretty steep decline at one point. But much better once they kind of close that gap into the mid-range category or 25 range. You can see here. Let's compare them maybe to like riflemen here. See riflemen obviously very high CQC damage and then fall off very, very sharply over range. And you can see, sections like part of what makes sections so strong is their Vet 1 passive. So their veteran passive is called Base of Fire. This provides extra accuracy against units out of target. Now, you'll notice also that the infantry section has very high base accuracy on its weapons. You can see even at far range, like there is a very high probability they're going to hit the target, like over almost a 1 in 3 chance that they're going to miss, which is probably the highest out of most of the line units. And then you add stack Base of Fire on top of this, they're virtually never going to miss a target that's out in the open. So this passive, super, super strong, especially because it stacks with some of their weapon upgrades like the bread gun. It makes them even really effective against CQC units as they're trying to close the gap in the open. The bread gun is going to deal a great deal of extra damage because of the Base of Fire bonus and accuracy. Now, if you stack on top of this, I'm just going to pop up the game quickly here. If you stack on top of this, the Infantry Training Center bonuses, this training component stacked on top of your section's already good performance, this is what makes them late game monsters. I've said before, like, I feel like a Tommy section borders on being as strong as a Stostruppen once they have training and veterancy, as well as the Bren gun upgrade. Obviously, they're not quite as good, but like for their cost, they really punch above their weight. Trade really, really effectively, even into other long-range units like Jaegers, and they'll trade perfectly fine into like Panzer Grenadiers, DAC Panzer Grenadiers as well. And Grenadiers are just going to get completely crushed by the time these guys get to Vet 2. We quickly look back at the Vet 2 bonuses that they get. We'll see here extra accuracy again, and then increased rate of fire. Again, this stacks with some of their weapon upgrades. Now, speaking to the weapon upgrades, both the Bren gun and the Recce package are excellent in their current state. Recce especially good because of the upgrades to the 25 pounder, which we'll talk about close to the end as we talk about the British emplacements. 25 pounder in a really, really good spot. And obviously the extra vision and then accuracy against units in cover on these rifles just makes them almost... they're pretty much always hitting their shots with a Recce package, which is crazy. And then obviously factoring in the weapon accuracy bonuses that they get, accuracy from training, accuracy from Base of Fire. These are bar none like the most accurate and consistent damage dealing line units in the game. So infantry sections, the way that I see them in their current state, also want to talk quickly about rifle grenades. I think these are highly underrated. I think we saw a big resurgence of usage of these with the release of the Canadian Battlegroup and access to the incendiary grenades, which really just pushes them straight up into the OP tier. But rifle grenades in and of themselves are probably some of the best grenades in the game. They're a much more difficult to read than a standard frag grenade because you can't quite as easily see them. They also travel a lot faster, and obviously they're dealing damage on impact as opposed to having a timer. And so the grenade package on your sections is a really, really great choice, especially after you've gotten your first 1 or 2 vehicles to kind of help deter from vehicle pushes via snares, and then also the ability to fire these rifle grenades at range, especially against like machine guns or other team weapons, make them really, really threatening. So big fan of the rifle grenades. You want to talk about the Bren gun here and how the Bren gun really supplements the Tommy damage profile. So you can see here, their damage actually increases over range. Actually, no, it's almost flat. Okay. But I do want to show the difference between Bren gun and a standard here. Tommy. US doesn't have a Tommy. Tommy with the Bren gun. This one. Tightrope hopefully will come in long if that. You can see the Bren gun has gradually increasing DPS at range as your opponent closes the gap, and you can see like the slight fall off here from the Lee Enfield. And a Bren gun is about double, I think. Yeah, it's about double the DPS of a standard Lee Enfield, which is awesome. The single target damage on this is exceptional, and then you add in all of the accuracy bonuses that come with the infantry section later on, with the veteran C2 infantry training, base of fire, makes the Bren gun way more lethal than this, like way more. Because all the accuracy, like the Enfield already has very high base accuracy, but the accuracy multipliers for the Bren gun go much further because the base accuracy is a little bit lower. And so the Bren gun is bar none like the best DPS choice for the infantry section. The only things you're missing out on, obviously, flares, the recon capabilities of having extra vision range, and the out of cover bonus, which honestly, like the Bren gun is still going to compensate for that with the bonuses to accuracy that it gets later on. Like it's still going to be the best damage choice, even if your opponent is fighting well in cover compared to the Tommy Lee Enfields, the Scoped Lee Enfields. And obviously, this is also going to be the best choice if your opponent is playing heavy on assault troops, because you're going to be able to cut down your opponent's assault troops more quickly with the Bren gun one at a time. The high single target damage is what makes this weapon upgrade so good, and you're going to be able to cut down members of your opponent's squad much more quickly, which is going to impact their overall DPS and create a snowballing effect for your infantry section. So, like I said, bar none, best line unit in the game, easily. You can see they have a slightly better capture multiplier than your opening Sappers. I didn't talk about the boys anti-tank rifle package, and that was actually deliberate. I don't really like the boys in its current state. Now, it can be useful. I find that at higher level gameplay, like the players that I play against, generally their micro is so good that it's very difficult to use this effectively. But it is an effective deterrent if you're really struggling with enemy light vehicles in the early game. This can be a good choice. But there are some better choices that I would recommend, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But don't generally recommend this because it impacts their anti-infantry capabilities too much and really hurts their scaling against infantry. And really what you want the sections to be used for is basically providing that long range base of fire, the recon capabilities that you get from them as well. We'll talk about using the recce package. So I'm hearing a lot about like cloaked MGs, cloaked battle group, espionage battle group, and people kind of like talking about how difficult it is to work with those at the moment. I mean, they definitely are. They're definitely oppressive. They definitely need to be tuned or reworked or whatever. But if you're loading up your recce section, if you're loading up on recce sections and have at least 3 of them with the flare upgrade, there is a 3-minute cooldown in between flares. Flares, I believe, last about 30 seconds. And if you have 3 sections with flares, you can pretty consistently provide vision over and reveal your enemy if you just juggle the cooldown on each of them, and make sure that you're kind of properly spacing the cooldown on each of your sections. And then as you're pushing into an area, or as you see, or hear your opponent in the fog of war approaching you, then you may want to pop up a flare and reveal those units so you don't get clapped by an ambush bonus. And then, of course, obviously, Recce's also have extra detection range, similar to other detector units. I think there's a lot of new players that don't know the difference between detector units and non-detector units. There are units in the game at the moment that have a increased range at which they can reveal enemies compared to standard units. These would include scouts, a lot of light vehicles, and then this Recce package is what actually increases the detection range of the infantry section specifically. So if you're playing against, the long and the short of it is that if you're playing against a stealth battle group, whether it's the MGs coming from Wehrmacht or the espionage battle group from DAC, triple Recce section is a great way to have consistent vision and kind of counter some of their capabilities in the early game. And you just want to be careful about how you're spending the cooldown on your flares. And also the extra vision is really going to help you over the course of the game. So anyway, a lot of yapping about sections, but I'm actually putting sections in the OP tier. Relative to the other line units I talked about, Riflemen, Grenadiers, and DAC Panzer Grenadiers, these guys are just a cut above, and they scale better than any other infantry unit with access to training and their veterancy. They are bar none the best line unit in the game, and so for that reason, we're throwing them up into the OP category. Next, that takes us to the Dingo. So the Dingo is a excellent, reasonably maneuverable, not fast, but reasonably maneuverable ultralight vehicle for UK forces. It's a little bit unique because it doesn't have the capability or even an upgrade capability to capture territory, unlike the Jeep, the Kradschützen, and the Kettenkrad. But this is the best armored, highest health pool, and highest DPS ultralight vehicle in the game. This is the natural hunter and counter to the DAC 250. So if you're playing against DAC and you're anticipating a 250, honestly, I build this every single game that I play against DAC. If I'm in a DAC matchup in a team game, I will build this also. It is just like between the recon, access to the forward observer artillery barrage as one of its abilities, and then the frontline ability to distribute medical supplies when your sappers take some chip damage or your sections in the early game. This is really, really nice and helps you kind of rebuild your potential tempo and presence on the map between engagements. And like I mentioned, it's also fairly, like, it's decently armored and has a very high health pool for its class. It is the same as kind of the 250, but the Bren gun on it is much higher, more consistently penetrating DPS. You can see the penetration is very high on the Dingo's 30 cal. And so it's a really, really good counter to early game 250s. Now, once the 250 gets the armor upgrade, it will have the edge against the Dingo, and it won't be quite as good. And that's why if you're playing against a 250 in the early game, try to find an opportunity to chase it down and take it out before around the 3.5 to 4 minute mark. Because if your opponent is going to go for the armor upgrade for their half tracks, that is going to be the window in which they get it, and then your Dingo is not going to be quite as effective. It's not bad, but it's not nearly as one-sided as it is before the DAC 250 gets the armor upgrade. So definitely recommend building the Dingo against DAC. So I also mentioned distributing medical supplies in the early game. I noticed, like, especially now that I've been doing a lot more coaching of players around like the 1,000 to 1,200 elo mark, one of the things that I see a lot of is people just forget about abilities. And virtually every single unit has abilities. So just taking the time to really look at your unit and look at what it can do beyond just its combat capabilities, and looking at the different abilities and how to use them is what's going to elevate your game as a player. And with the Dingo specifically, keeping it healthy in the early game so that you can keep it on the field and then distribute medical supplies to your troops when they're out of combat after, say, the first or second engagement. And the more often you can use this on the front line, the more tempo and the more threat you're going to build, which is going to allow you to kind of continue to press your advantage. Whereas if you don't use this what's going to happen is you're going to take an engagement, and then even if you win, as soon as your opponent comes back with more units, you're eventually going to have to fold, go back to base, and heal, right? Now, the other really important thing about getting the Dingo in the early game is this is what is going to allow you to have exceptional timing on a Humber if you're planning to go for it, because you're not going to have to build your medical tent in the early game if you use this ability properly. You'll be able to build your medical tent after you finish your Humber, which is going to allow you to get the best possible timing and make the most of your Humber. Like I mentioned, you know, this thing, very good armor, very high health pool. In the early game, you want to be driving into your opponent, getting up in their face. For the most part, if you're dealing with like SMG squads, like, you know, a couple squads of Pioneers, you don't necessarily want to close the gap on them. But using it for recon, the forward observer artillery barrage access in the early game, if you're not planning to go for a recce section, I mean, getting Vet 1 and then using this is going to be a little bit cheaper on the munition side because the recce section you have to pay for the upgrade first. But the forward observer artillery barrage is just fantastic and a great way to flush out machine guns or other team weapon positions in the early game. And also, the Dingo has, bar none, the best recon capabilities out of the British roster, outside of the commander mode for the Stuart, which we'll talk about. So overall, the Dingo, very strong unit, very capable, definitely a cut above its class for an ultralight vehicle. And it can hold its ground even against some like mid-tier light vehicles like the 251 and the 221 from Wehrmacht. But obviously from DAC, once they get out like the Flak Vierling or 8 Red, those vehicles it's not going to stand a chance against. You do want to be wary of those. But the 251 and the 221, you know, the Dingo, it's not going to win 1v1. It will lose slowly, but it should be able to kind of like deal some chip damage. And if it's properly supporting your troops as well, it's going to be able to kind of help with the deterrent component, deterrent element against the 251 and the 221 pre-upgrades. That's an important step. Or obviously the Stummel upgrade or the Panzerbuska is going to make short work of the Dingo. But the machine guns mounted on the top, the Dingo is going to trade okay into those. It's gonna lose, but again, the point is it's trading well above its unit class as a tier 1 unit. That takes us to the British Mortar. I don't really like the British Mortar. There's not too much to say about it. As far as mortars go, it's probably the worst. Actually, I want to compare it. Let's do a quick comparison of the British Mortar to maybe the 3-inch. We'll do that again. Wehrmacht mortar. Oh, so comparing these two, I'm really the most curious about these. Okay, it looks like they seem to have the same scatter and the same damage. Yeah, I mean, these are probably in the same class. Like, I wouldn't say that this, for a mortar, like, it does what it's supposed to do. But obviously it's going to be a step below the American mortar with access to its special abilities. And I believe the American mortar, actually, let's just confirm that, because I would hate to say that and have it be incorrect. Team. Okay, yeah, so the M1 has, yeah, okay, so less scatter on the M1 mortar team compared to the UK mortar team. The M1 mortar has the best scatter in the game, unsurprisingly, and you can see the British mortar at far range starts to scatter quite a bit more, similar to the Wehrmacht one. Yeah, so yeah, not super surprising. I'm not using this very often. UK has plenty of other indirect fire options, especially for team games. There may be circumstances in a 1v1 where I'd consider a UKF mortar, but I find specifically what it really comes down to is the 25 pounder has been made so incredibly good that it's more worth it to spend the munitions on the 25 pounder as your indirect support over building and spending resources on a UK mortar. So I don't really recommend this unit for that reason. I'll put it in the okay category instead of bad. I actually thought it was worse than the Wehrmacht Mortar, but it looks like they seem to be about the same. But the nice thing about the Wehrmacht Mortar is it does come with a flare at Vet 1 for vision, which is really nice. I know this has the entrenchment option, which can be decent, but especially when you're playing team games and other games where there's like heavy artillery or light artillery coming out, these guys don't usually they're not able to usually make good use of that ability and stay on the field for super long. And so for that reason, I don't really recommend building the British Mortar. Generally, you're better off using the section Recce Artillery or Recce Artillery, or the Forward Observer Artillery from the Dingo. Next, we have the 6-pounder. As far as AT guns go, the 6-pounder is perfectly average. I don't really think there's anything super special about the 6-pounder. We'll compare it quickly here to the M1 AT gun from US. I think it has the same. Do they have the same penetration? Slightly better penetration than the American AT gun. And then if we're comparing it to the PaK 40, no. PaK. Compare it here. Oh, that is not, no. If we compare it, has slightly higher rate of fire at long range compared to the PaK 40. Same penetration at long range as well. But worse penetration as enemy targets close the gap. This is going to make it struggle a little bit more against vehicles in like the Stug class of armor or heavy tanks, of course, as well. But does get some really nice bonuses through veterancy over the course of the game. Rate of fire and then entrenchment for reducing damage is really nice as well. And then also the extra rate of fire can dish out entrenchment bonus. Nice. As far as AT guns go, like I said, not too much to say about this. It is a perfectly average AT gun as far as AT guns go. And frankly, this is a staple unit of the UK Forces mid game because, as we'll talk about a little bit later on, they don't really have any like very punchy mid game vehicles like some of the Axis counterparts do. And it's really the only weapon that's going to be very consistently penetrating some of those mid-game vehicles, like the Whirlwind, the Martyr, the Stug, etc. And so it's a staple of the mid-game, especially if you're going for an extended British mid-game, which you probably will be if you're playing any kind of team games and using Bishops or Stuarts. So yeah, the 6-pounder, I would certainly recommend this unit, but there's nothing really exceptional to push it into the class of strong or OP, I would say. Actually, I'm just quickly going to zip into the game here and show the stacking with team weapon training is really what's going to help you bridge the gap in your mid game if you're facing a lot of armor from your opponent. Because of the extra rate of fire and health, this is going to be the difference between missing your, like, not being able to get off the killing blow on an opponent's vehicle versus like landing that shot, because of the time between rounds is going to be shorter with team weapon training. So if you're finding that you're struggling with some mid-game armor from Axis, team weapon training is a great way to help you with that. And it's also going to boost the survivability of your team weapons to make them much more durable, and they're also going to be easier to retain the veterancy on, of course. So I'm just going to show the difference here really quickly. You'll notice the 6-pounder team, they have a good health pool. They have 100 health per squad member, but then once you get in the team weapon training, and then they get up to once you get up to Vet 1, then they go up to 130. So it's a 30% increase in health because they also get extra health from Vet 1. So it stacks one on top of the other. And then you can see here, obviously, the rate of fire bonus after Vet 1 is also going to be really nice. And it's going to make a huge difference in your AT gun's capability to... Actually, let's just put them side by side so you guys can actually see the difference. See, one shot from each, and then the vet one is going to fire much faster. You can see the difference there, right? Rate of fire bonus making a huge difference. And again, if you do not go for training, you don't get any rate of fire bonuses until vet 3. And then here we'll compare them at vet 3 together. Oh wait, no, actually we can't do training versus non-training. Less. Pounder. This is select both. This one will do vet 3. Do vet 3. Up. Pause. Well. Go. Now. Now. Pause. Background. Hopefully. Oh, they're both going to shoot at that. We can see if we can see the rate of fire difference between these two. Yeah, look at this, man. This thing shoots. Look at how fast he's loading these rounds, dude. Look at this. 50% reload speed. I mean, this is still good, you know, but like, man, look at the difference. So, sorry, long-winded way, but I really wanted you guys to see the difference here between this AT gun and this AT gun. Like, it is the team weapon training makes all the difference. And then also look at the arc on this. Holy smokes, look at this arc. It's massive. So yeah, the training element makes a huge difference in the mid and late game performance of your AT guns. You can also see comparing their health side by side. I mean, they both get access to damage reduction, but it's just going to go that much further on your team weapon trained 6-pounder because they have 130 health as opposed to 115. So yeah, that was really like, that was what I wanted to show you guys as far as the 6-pounder goes. Don't hesitate, don't slack on the team weapon training if you're facing a lot of mid-game armor from your opponents. The rate of fire and the extra health makes all the difference. Sorry, long-winded there, but getting into the British Tier 2. Sorry, this 6-pounder was the first unit of British Tier 2. The next is going to be the Humber. So, the Humber is a very high skill ceiling vehicle. Because of its speed, because of its mobility, but also like the fragility of it is also what makes it a high skill ceiling vehicle. Because being able to keep your distance from your opponent's snares, which will cause you engine damage, is really the difference between being able to use this thing to its maximum potential and finding it as a unit that's very easy to lose and a huge liability. So, but I'm a huge fan of the Humber, especially in a 1v1 setting. The tempo and the aggression that you can just turn on when this Humber comes out is unparalleled by anything else in the UK roster. And the UK roster, you can see from our early game options, like there's not a lot of like super aggressive units that are going to give us a lot of space and tempo in the early game compared to something like DAC, where DAC, you know, with the bike, with the 250, they can create a lot of space and take up a lot of territory early on just by running you over. And the British can't do that quite as well. They kind of have to slowly, methodically pick you apart in order to create space. And the Humber kind of flips that dynamic on its head, where the Humber can come out, it can quickly flank units, get behind them, it can smoke team weapons to allow you to push in. So here, let's pull up the card for the Humber so you guys can see the card here. So we've got... So, the Humber, very low health pool. You'll actually notice it's got almost the same health pool as the Dingo. But its speed and acceleration are unprecedented. I'd actually like to compare it here to the 221. Not going to be that easy, is it? That's not quite going to be searchable. So you'll notice the speed of the 221 and the Humber are almost exactly the same. Very, very fast. The damage capabilities between the two, the Humber has the edge. Even against infantry, it definitely has the edge because of the 15 millimeter machine gun. And you also notice like the moving accuracy on the 15 millimeter machine gun is also quite good, unlike the 30 cal. Now you're gonna deal the most damage standing still, of course, but the 15 millimeter is really, really nice for hitting targets, chasing them down. And essentially how you want to use the Humber, and what I really wanted to focus on here, is this is a flanking unit to allow you to get positioning on your opponent, to force away isolated units and or pick them off. And then you can also like kind of do passing, like kind of drive-bys on like the center section of the map where you're fighting. The fighting is the most fierce. Using the smoke barrage to flush out team weapon positions or create space for your infantry to close the gap. And then when there are bigger infantry engagements happening, mark area is an excellent ability because it makes targets in that area easier to hit. And that's not just for the Humber, it's for any unit that's actually shooting at it. So this ability, I don't see this ability used nearly enough in the coaching that I'm doing. It's a free ability. Yeah, it's got a decent cooldown on it, but like the ability to completely snowball an engagement by using this ability is I mean, it's unmatched by any other early game ability, especially coming from a vehicle. And it's just going to make your sections, your sappers, whatever team weapons you have, perform that much better against enemy units. It actually says units, but I'm pretty sure it only applies to infantry. I kind of want to test that now. All right, back into the game. We're doing it live. Let's look at the game. So I'm so curious now. Let's look at the Humber. Are you my little sweet prince? All right, we'll just plop down here a. See, does it make it easier to hit all kinds of? Oh, it does. Oh, we all learned something here today. Okay, this is incredible. Meaning, when you're going for the chasing, the killing blow on vehicles, or like your 6-pounders about to try to land that final shot against a flak veerling, if you can hit it with the mark area first, oh man, you are going to be in good shape. You're a very high chance of hitting that last shot, getting the killing blow. So very, very nice ability here. And you'll notice actually the area is much bigger than the selector shows. So take that into consideration when you're placing it. If you're getting really aggressive on a group of units and you're trying to get them on retreat, then place it kind of like behind them, right? So if there's like a machine gun here, for example, or we'll do a quick mortar here, right? If we do that, and I want to try to focus on how I can kill this thing on retreat, I'm going to throw it behind them. So that way, see, I'm encompassing it. And now if he decides to retreat, I'm going to get the bonus for a longer period of time as he's running away. Whereas like if you're just trying to win a big engagement in an area, then obviously you just pick an area in the center of the engagement that's going to be hit and tag the most number of Axis units to help you win. So there you have it. And like I mentioned, also the smoke barrage, this thing is critical to use. I did want to showcase a little bit of a trick to help you escape some situations where you may be being pursued by Panzerschrecks or other light vehicles. I see a lot of players complaining about like, oh, the handheld AT is such a pain to fight against, especially from the Jaegers. Jaegers have an abysmal time trying to fire their Panzerschreck through smoke. And so what you can do is create a kind of a screen for yourself. If you're concerned about getting hit by the Jägerschreck follow-up, if they manage to get off the first shot and you're like, oh my gosh, if I get hit by another one, I'm going to die. Oftentimes it's actually better just to drop smoke at your feet so that the second shot from the Jaeger, before it fires off, you have the smoke screen in front of you, and that's going to allow you to safely back away. Because if you try to just drive away, a lot of the time you're just going to get caught by the second shot. And so what you want to do is lace a smoke screen just right at your feet, right at the feet of your vehicle, so that as you're trying to escape, your opponent's going to have to try to attack ground, and there's like a very low probability that it's going to actually make it through. So I'll just show you guys really quickly here. So I do the smoke, right? And like if I'm trying to hit this through the smoke, like I have such a low probability of hitting it. And then even then, like the behavior of the vehicle is kind of like, it's so wonky trying to fire through smoke. Like these guys have so much trouble with trying to fire through smoke. Look at this scatter. It's horrible, right? The attack ground on Panzerschrecks is just, it's not consistent. It's consistently bad is what it is. And this is another thing that makes the smoke abilities from like smoke operation, for example, so valuable when you're fighting against Panzer. There we go. He finally hit it. Took him 4 shots, but he finally did it. So I wanted to call that as like a little trick out for the Humber. Circling back to the Humber itself, obviously great veterancy options. And what is really strong about this thing is if you manage to keep it alive until you go tier 4, then refit it into something like an early Crusader, you're going to create so much tempo that your opponent's like going to have a really hard time staying in the game. Because you're just going to accelerate the rate at which you're able to get out tier 4 vehicles, and then you're going to be able to have a higher vehicle. You're going to be able to have more vehicles than your opponent does. So using the Humber as a catapult unit to kind of launch your way into tier 4 is a great strategy in both team games and 1v1s, and is part of what makes the Humber so fantastic. So the Humber, I think it borders on OP, honestly, but I am going to put it in the strong category because it is very difficult to use and it is very fragile. But for the speed and power that you get and how early it comes out, it's just a fantastic, fantastic unit. Next, we have the CWT truck. There's really no reason to keep this. I'm going to talk more about the upgrades. Obviously, when you build the CWT truck, generally you're going to upgrade it into either the medical version or the Polsten. Now, as for the trucks themselves, I think the medical truck is perfectly average as far as medical trucks go. If anything, it's actually better than the DAC medical truck, only in its durability, I would say. Compared to the DAC version, the British medical truck is more durable, similar to the American half-track as well. But the half-track, again, also more durable than even the CWT truck. But overall, that is really the strength of it. That one on it, the reduced... I'll actually pull it up here. The reduced manpower cost on reinforcements is pretty good. Up the CWT. This is the resupply. Let's look at the card here. On the medical truck, and we'll see the veterancy here. So the veteran ability on it is the medical. There we go. Improve logistics. Sorry about that. Improve logistics. Here it is. So it reduces the reinforcement cost to nearby affected infantry. This is really excellent for team games. It's going to allow you to build a slight economic advantage. And if you even stack this on top of Indian artillery battle groups reserve infantry at the late tree, which we'll talk about later, gets even better. The economic aspect of logistics here. So I recommend these for team games. I think they're very good, especially with light vehicle training. Allows you to get access to this immediately, which is really going to help you in the early game against opponents where you're trading a lot of, like if you're losing a lot of squad members, you're gonna reduce the economic impact to yourself. And once you get training, if you build this truck and then upgrade it with training, currently training is bugged on light vehicles where it will stack first when you build the vehicle and then when you upgrade it to something else. This also happens with the Crusader tank. Honestly, it's a bug. It needs to be fixed. But it is a very useful way to like progress into Vet 2 on your medical truck, which is going to increase your healing aura range, the reinforcement speed, and then of course you're going to get access to the improved ballistics element. So as far as medical trucks go, I actually think this is probably more in the strong category if you incorporate training into it. And so for that reason, I'm a big fan. Polsten has kind of the same sort of situation, but as far as this unit goes, anti-aircraft capabilities, not great. There are much better anti-aircraft units in the game. The M16, I think, is still probably the peak, as well as the Flak Vierling and the Werbel. But the Polsten, it does respectable damage. This unit is fun. The way that it can be used at max range with training, and some of the flak rounds that it gets access to, or the HE rounds, the explosive rounds that it gets access to. This could be a great weapon to kind of park behind your lines and act as a deterrent for enemy light vehicles, harass their team weapons, and just a great like base of fire unit. Probably much more of something that you would use to complement a group of sections or like your main force than something like a Humber. Humber is much more easily played like to the outsides of the map, using for flanks, using for going for kills. But the smoke aspect, the smoke on the Humber is also, and the mark area ability is what makes it better, I think, in a general context than this. But this is a great unit to just kind of park behind your lines and have it deal damage from max range where it's hard to retaliate against. But this unit, it's still very fragile. It's still very susceptible to getting dove by enemy light vehicles. And between its cost, the cost of building the truck and then investing the munitions on it, it's a little bit expensive, I think, for how it performs. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's just okay. That takes us to the Stuart. So the Stuart is a side tech choice or side tech option from the British Tier 2. And generally speaking, I think this is one of the stronger light tanks in the early game. And I know people have very mixed feelings about the Stuart. I think like we really kind of need to talk about how to use the Stuart the best way possible in order to kind of highlight that strength. And I've talked about this a lot in my coaching videos because I know players are kind of apprehensive to build the Stuart because of the tech cost associated with it. But it does give really great tempo, and it has some fantastic utility to talk about. Okay, I think this is actually for really quick. There we go. This takes us to the upgrades. Okay, so the Stuart. Couple things to call out about the Stuart specifically. Number one, it's one of the more highly armored light vehicles on the Allies roster specifically. And what I want to call out specifically is that the frontal armor on this thing, virtually impenetrable to small arms, or completely impenetrable, I think. The rear armor, I believe, is penetrable to, especially to some LMGs. But the frontal armor, virtually impenetrable. And this is also true against the Flak 30. So the 2-centimeter gun from Wehrmacht's Tier 2, the Luftwaffe gun, this thing is a great soft counter to it because usually I see a lot of Wehrmacht players build that as a response to light vehicles because it can chew through a lot of vehicles like the Greyhound. Even the Chaffee takes decent damage from this, but the M3 Stuart can actually handle the fire from the flak at max range. It is going to take some damage, but not very much, honestly. And that makes it a great way to kind of like frontally address the flak 30 and deter it, rather than worrying about, like, you know, with the Humber, if the Humber gets caught up by the flak 30, it's just going to get chewed through super quickly. So the Stuart is a great option for that specifically. It also is very resistant to other like flak fire, so basic fire from the flak Veerling without the Vet 1 ability, the armor piercing rounds. It is fairly resistant to, not completely, but fairly. As well as the Whirlwind. The Whirlwind doesn't have the best penetration against the Stuart, but the Whirlwind will slowly beat the Stuart, but it takes such a long time that the Stuart can generally find its way to support or protection or backup before it gets killed. Generally, the only time a Whirlwind's getting killed or killing a Stuart is if it is basically finishing it off from some other damage that it took, or if the Stuart is overextended, like dramatically. So this is a great anchor unit for your mid game as UK forces, and I think this is where I hear a lot of people struggling. Is they're like, man, I build infantry and then I build AT guns and I'm trying to get to tier 4, but I get overrun by Whirlwinds, or I get overrun by Flak Veerling or whatever, and I struggle too much using the Humber because it's so fragile and it dies so easily. All very valid points and very true, and that is why the Stuart exists. On its own, it's going to have a hard time killing things like the Whirlwind, but it is going to make a great deterrent and support unit for your team weapons and your infantry to help you follow up and close the kill on a flak Veerling that you landed from. Maybe you landed an AT gun shot and it's low. The Stuart is going to help you kind of close the gap and try to finish it off. It also has some great abilities, which we're going to talk about in a second here. So anyway, as far as the Stuart goes in terms of its cost, yes, it is expensive to unlock. But again, remembering that once we get to tier 4, we have access to withdraw and refit. That's going to open up possibilities for us to invest heavily in our mid-game composition, make our way to tier 4, and then refit our vehicles so that we can get into a strong late game. So with the Stuart, you have essentially 2 options in terms of upgrades. If you're building 2 or 3 or more Stuarts, survival package is probably going to be your best choice. Specifically because of the repairing. The self-repair is faster than a standard engineer repair, which to me is absolutely crazy. Standard engineer repairs at 8 health per second. It's, I believe, 11 or 11.5 with the hazard removal kit. But it repairs faster than a base engineer. This allows you to take quick trades, pull out of combat, and then self-repair, and then get back in the action, which is going to maximize the uptime of your Stuart. And then it also gives you access to the smoke canister ability. We talked about the smoke's implications on like Jaegers and other weapons from your enemy, like AT weapons, packs, everything. Everything's harder to hit through smoke, of course. And so that extra micro attacks against your opponent is going to be the best way to use smoke. Now, something I want to call out about vehicle-based smoke abilities. So unlike the Humber, this smoke package, it just fires immediately. The Humber actually has to aim and fire the smoke, but this smoke is going to be used immediately. And this is kind of a small micro tip for using the Stuart specifically. I'm just going to switch back into the game here so we can see. So I'm going to pull up the Stuart, and effectively the best way to use the survival package on the Stuart is here. Let's get you in connected survival pack first, and pull up a pack here as an example. Okay, so we've got our survival package. Okay, this is going to be the enemy AT gun that we're going to use for our example here. Now, what I see a lot of players doing is they will come in, they'll take a shot from the AT gun. Oh, it actually missed. That's funny. So we'll let him hit a shot. And then like, oh my gosh, I got hit by an AT gun. I'm going to pop smoke and back away. Right? I'm going to pop smoke and I'm going to back away immediately. This is, against one AT gun especially, this is the wrong way to use your smoke, because what you have done is by popping your smoke immediately, your opponent now knows that in order for me to finish this target, I am going to have to attack ground through the smoke. Okay? Think about the psychological element of this, okay? If you pop the smoke immediately, so we'll just drive this in and show it here, right? If I, oh my gosh, oh, I gotta back up, okay? If I pop the smoke immediately, my opponent now knows that I need to attack ground through the smoke in order to finish it off, right? But think about this, okay? So if I drive into my opponent's AT gun, there's a time in between shots that it's gonna be reloading that I'm gonna be backing away, right? And by driving in, taking the first shot, going, oh gosh, okay, I gotta back up. And then waiting, you should know, AT guns have between, like it's a 3 and 4 second reload, I believe. You can kind of count to 3. 3 Mississippis, I think, is the safest way to do this. Counting to 3 Mississippis from taking the first AT gun hit, and then as you're backing up, popping the smoke at the last second, so that your opponent doesn't have the opportunity to react and quickly attack ground before you slip out of range. This is the best way to use smoke canisters. And it's not just true of AT guns, it's true of any kind of anti-tank fire that you're up against. Whether you're dealing with mortars or dealing with Panzerjägers or whatever, don't pop your smoke right away. Save it right before the next volley is going to come in from your opponent. And honestly, you're probably going to lose some vehicles practicing this, but I think it's worth doing. You're gonna eliminate your opponent's window to respond to the fact that you've popped smoke, right? And now what that means is that your opponent, in order for them to keep up with you, they're going to have to actually anticipate that you're going to pop smoke, which means they're going to default to attacking ground, and they actually have a higher chance of just missing because of scatter, right? So that's a little micro tip I wanted to share with you guys when it comes to the Stuart specifically. And frankly, this is true of any vehicle that has onboard smoke. Consider trying to practice this tactic because it's going to make you much better at being able to escape anti-tank weapons and give your opponent, minimize their opportunity to respond to the fact that you've popped smoke, right? Try to save your smoke until like right before your opponent is about to fire. And that way, you know, the auto targeting is going to lose track. Your opponent is going to try to attack ground in response, but they're going to have such a small window before you get out of range that they're not going to be able to pull it off a lot of the time. Okay, so sorry, we yapped a lot about micro for the Stuart, but I do want to break down the unit itself. So we talked about the survival package. Now let's talk about Tank Commander. When you have 1 or 2 Stuarts and you're playing heavy team weapon composition, especially like double AT guns, the Tank Commander is a great upgrade to have on at least one of your Stuarts. And generally, if you're going to build one Stuart, my philosophy generally is like, if I'm going to build one Stuart, I may as well build 2. Because they can protect each other, they can support each other. And again, once I eventually make it to tier 4 anyways, I'm going to refit probably. I'm probably going to refit my survival package Stuart for a tier 4 tank and keep the Tank Commander. Because the Tank Commander has some great bonuses. So we have Coordinate Infantry. I believe this coordination, it also impacts AT guns. So having this thing parked near your AT guns with the Tank Commander mode on, where is it? Where's the reconnaissance scan ability? Here it is. 35 vision range. This is like the perfect tool to pair with a double AT gun combination. It's going to allow you to spot your opponent's units, and then you combine that with the Tank Commander bonuses of the reload rate. Let me just confirm that really quickly and make sure that Commander mode actually works with. I believe it does. Pretty sure I've seen the bonus before. We'll pull it up here. Right, there it is. So there's the icon of our Coordinate Infantry bonus. We can see here if we mouse over, we got extra accuracy and reload speed. Now stacking this again with training, I mean, I can only imagine. Let's see how crazy the rate of fire is. We've already got the training, which is great. The coordinate, let's get any better. No, I don't. Let's do this. Let's do 1, 2, 3. Veterancy. Oh my gosh, this rate of fire is going to be insane. Holy smokes. That is quick. Right? And so this is really going to take your AT guns to like their peak performance. And if you're playing with double AT guns, you also have access to Mark Vehicle, which is going to make it much easier to pick off individual targets. I think this is a criminally underused ability for the Stuart. I brought it up in one of my recent coaching videos. This ability, combined with the performance of your AT guns, with team weapon training, with the coordinated infantry bonus, I mean, your AT guns probably won't be Vet 3 at this point. They'll probably be like Vet 1 or Vet 2, but it's just going to make the performance of your AT guns that much better, and is going to help you survive against the onslaught of light vehicles from your Axis opponents. Again, the Stuart by itself kind of struggles to fight all of those Axis vehicles 1v1, but the way that you can support your AT guns especially, that's what's going to keep you in the game until you make it to your tier 4. And then you can start pressing the advantage again, right? We also have access to Tread Shot at Vet 1, which again, you know, if my opponent is diving me, this is going to act as a very nice long-range snare that's going to slow down the target so that I can finish them off with my AT guns as well. So it's an excellent way to protect and support your AT guns. And if your opponent decides they're going to dive on you anyways, if you have 2 of these Stuarts, that means they're going to be exposing their armor. They're going to be exposing their rears to you, which is going to allow you to reactively use the Stuarts as your anti-medium defense. And these guys will be able to penetrate the rear armor of even some of the medium and heavier tanks like Panzer IVs, Panzer IIIs, Stugs, Black Veerling, of course. Even the back of the Tiger, the Stuart is going to be able to get through if it's close enough. And so basically what you want to do is use your Stuarts to support your team weapons, and then when they find an opportunity to like pick off something that's low, then they can close in for the kill on like the Flak Veerling or the Werble or whatever. But obviously trying to use these things independent of AT guns or other supporting units, it's going to be very, very difficult. So that's a quick call out about the coordinated infantry bonus. Tread Shot we talked about, fantastic ability, long range snare that's going to work for 5 seconds against whatever vehicle you hit with it. So the Stuart, criminally I think underrated unit. I have seen some of like the spam of this in team games, but I'm seeing it more used in like a diving capacity, which is still good with the survival package, but it also fulfills like that support role very well also. So the Stuart, for that reason, we're going to put it in, for those reasons, we're putting it in the strong category. I think with the utility, and like as a base unit, if you don't think about the abilities, if you don't use the utility, if you don't use the commander mode, it's probably just an average light tank, very average. But when you incorporate all of those and maximize its strengths, it is definitely what I would consider a strong unit. However, I guess, you know, if I'm arguing with myself and for the purpose of this video, I mean, compared to other vehicles in its class, like the Greyhound, much better anti-infantry performance, Chaffee, much better against light vehicles. The Stuart has a propensity to miss a lot. That is one of its main weaknesses. It's not the most effective against infantry, but it's pretty good. With light vehicle training, it gets a lot better. But I will say, yeah, generally the Stuart, I think I'm going to leave it in the strong category. I would call it low strong, close to average. Overall decent. Bishop, I mean, I don't think I have to say a lot about this unit, but this thing is OP. This is the best mobile artillery in the game by far, bar none, not even close. And it has to do with the relative cost. So it is cheaper now than the Wesp. If you're factoring in the cost of the tech, it's not. But as an individual unit, it is cheaper than something like the Wesp. And with training and veterancy, as well as some of the supplementary bonuses from things like the supply cache from the American Ranger or Advanced Infantry Battle Group, is very strong, like very strong. And when coupled with training specifically, show you guys with light vehicle training, this thing is a monster. This thing is so strong. It has a very low cooldown, and you'll see here once we get vet 1, the rate of fire on it is quite fast for a mobile artillery unit, which is what makes it so powerful. Great area of effect. This unit, I mean, building at least 2 of them, I consider a staple in any kind of team game, whether it's 2v2, 3v3, or 4v4. And again, same principle as the Stuart. If you're going to build one of them, you may as well at least build 2. You can always refit them later, but I think building 2 of them is especially good because as you're focusing on individual targets, you have a much higher probability of wiping them with 2 bishops than you do with 1, just because of the doubled up firepower. It's going to be much harder for your opponent to reposition whatever team weapon or whatever you happen to be shooting at, could be vehicles too, that the bishop is just very good at. I actually had a recent game, I think it was like a 4 versus 4, where I played exclusively bishops and BL5s. It was a hilarious game. It was like 50 minutes long. So I may consider uploading that and just sharing that with you guys so you can see some of the strength of the bishop and how to use it. But yeah, this is bar none the best mobile artillery unit in the game. I think for its timing, the Stuka is better. The Stuka is better than the bishop as an individual unit, but it is a tier 4 unit that comes out. It is also more expensive. But the bishop is hands down the best artillery option for the allies. Better than the whiz bang, better than any of the emplacement artillery for sure. Has a much better blast radius profile, much better at killing infantry for that reason. And then of course, you know, considering the relative cost and the ability to move around, that is what makes the bishop so strong. Next, we'll talk about guards. I don't have a ton to say about guards specifically. The guard is kind of in a weird spot as a unit. I'm actually going to drop and put it on okay. Now, again, this is my opinion. I think there will be some people that would disagree with me about guards. I'm having a hard time fitting them into most of my compositions now. Because of the bonuses that were added to all of the Axis MGs on their tanks, which to kind of bring them in par with some of the allied tank performances, it's much harder to use handheld AT. And because of how expensive these guys are and how late they come out, I don't really find a great opportunity to use them for that. They do have the snare, which is very good, but I think like there are other units that perform kind of the same role, but just better. I'm thinking specifically about the 2-pounder. Like if I'm thinking about disabling vehicles and stuff, I think the 2-pounder is much better at that. And so I don't have a propensity to build guards very often. I just feel like they're very expensive. Now, they can be really great in like an Indian artillery composition if you combine them with Warcry. There are some circumstances where they can be made very good. But in general, I don't find myself building these guys too often because of how expensive they are, and they kind of turn out to be a little bit of a liability when your opponent starts to get more armor, because they can be chipped away at and then chased down on retreat. And in those situations, you know, I'd rather just keep my distance and use vehicles and have that absorb the damage over the guards. Still great at like surprising isolated tanks or locking them down as they're pushing into you potentially with armor. But in general, I don't really love building guards. Crusader. I talked about this in my other video. Unsurprisingly, Crusader's in the OP category for me. With the changes to rear armor and the bonus damage that you now get from them, I think Crusaders are easily the best tank in the British roster because it is the only tank that has the ability to get access to the rear armor of Axis tanks because of its speed and maneuverability. And when you combine Heroic Charge, Armor Training, and some of the veterancy options for the Crusader too, once you get access to that rear armor, this has the highest DPS of, I think, any tank. And it is the cheapest. So you combine all those factors together. I had more to say in my other video about the Crusader tank, but really like how you want to use these in the early game is here we'll pull up Crusader 2 so we can hard. Or the unit, I should say. That's the 2, so we'll do the 2 first. We'll talk about the... So generally, you don't want to upgrade the 6-pounder gun conversion until you're only worried about fighting tanks. And generally what I say is, if I'm planning a big dive, that is the time at which I am doing the 6-pounder gun conversion, and not before. Okay? I'm doing the 6-pounder gun conversion, yeah, on like once I've committed to being like, okay, I'm about to make a game-winning push here to try to kill all my opponent's tanks. That's when I'm doing the 6-pounder gun conversion, because prior to that, you do want to have the option to use them against infantry, and they won't go toe-to-toe with medium tanks. They will bounce mostly off the frontal armor. But if you're doing, as long as you're doing a big push and trying to execute a flank, get access to the side armor, the rear armor, that's where the Crusader is going to shine. And like I mentioned, because of that, I'm not typically using the 6-pounder gun conversion because it's just going to destroy your ability to fight infantry. The relative DPS of both of these cannons, the 6-pounder and, well, basically the Crusader 2 and the Crusader 3, is the same. It is the same DPS output, but the 6-pounder has a much better chance of penetrating medium and heavy armor than the 2-pounder does. So when you're fighting more Axis heavies or mediums, that's the time. And again, if you're not concerned about fighting infantry at all with the Crusaders, you can go for the 6-pounder conversion. But otherwise, I'm generally saving this conversion for when I'm doing a big push, especially against mediums or heavies. That's when I'm going to get the best results. And obviously, I'm going to be anticipating losing a lot of them well when you're doing game endings like that. But these guys in a horde are just, they're so dangerous. They're basically what the Chaffee was prior to a few patches ago. And I think the Chaffee still kind of has that potentially, but obviously the Crusader has more health. Obviously has anti-infantry utility before you execute your dives. And so anyway, like I mentioned, for that reason, I think it is easily the best tank in the British Royal. The Matilda, I feel like the Matilda's in a bit of a weird spot, mostly to do with the meta more than anything. It is a fantastic infantry support tank. Obviously, it's not very good at fighting vehicles. The penetration on the gun is pretty abysmal. It is very slow also, so it's not going to be able to chase anything down. The reason why it's in a weird spot is because tier 2.5 and stalling has become very meta and very common for Axis. And martyrs are much more commonplace than they were a couple patches ago. Because we're not seeing as many tier 4 rushes from Axis players because of the cost increases that we've seen. And for that reason, the Matilda's in a weird spot because once the martyrs come out, this thing becomes a big liability from my perspective. You're going to spend more time repairing with this than you are going to be in combat unless you've got great backup via like 6-pounders or other infantry to kind of apply pressure to enemy martyrs. But like the martyrs have such long range at the same time, they can usually poke away at this thing from a safe distance, and because it's so slow, it's not really going to threaten them. So for that reason, I'm actually putting the Matilda in the average category. Yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about that. The smoke on it is pretty good. The armor, obviously very good against handheld infantry, and I think if your opponent is spamming Jaegers and not building martyrs, this is a great choice. If you don't have access to the Churchill or other heavy armor variants, other heavy armor options, I should say. The Matilda is very good in that circumstance, fighting against a lot of AT infantry. But as soon as the martyrs start to come out, I think this thing is a bit of a liability, and so I'm not building it that often in a lot of my games. The Grant is definitely in the strong category. The relative DPS on this against light vehicles is definitely the best. It's even better than the Crusader, despite the Crusader having great rate of fire. And so what I'll say about the Grant is this is a fantastic brawler tank. It's got decent frontal armor. The main gun on it is excellent, and it will outtrade tanks like the Panzer IV or Panzer IIIs, of course, as well. The penetration on the main guns is also very good. This is probably the best scaling British tank. Better. it's different in identity than the Crusader. Obviously, it's more expensive as well. It is also performing better against infantry, and for late game like tank brawls where you're kind of like poking back and forth at each other, the Grant is the best option by far. The Grant is the best. The Crusaders are great for making decisive pushes, getting flanks, and going for game-winning kills. But if you're finding it's a bit of a late-game slogfest, the Grant may be a better option. The relative DPS between the top guns and the main gun is very good. Like I said, frontal armor is decent. It also has a very nice health pool on it. It's much beefier than the Crusader tank. I'll actually just do a quick comparison for you guys. We'll compare it to the... let's go to, it's the P4. So you can kind of see the difference. 3, Panzer 3. So you can see, has more health than the Panzer IV. It's got 840 health. The main guns on it, main gun penetration on the Grant is excellent. As far as medium tank gun penetration goes, you can see the P4 not nearly as good. Much better chance of bouncing off the front of the Grant armor. I believe they have identical armor. Yep, same armor. The P4 against the Grant, but the Grant has the edge due to extra penetration on the main gun, as well as the extra health that it has. So like I said, great brawler tank for the late game. Once you're running up against, like, if your opponent has a lot of martyrs and or a lot of like Panthers or those kinds of tanks, I have a propensity to like take a Grant composition and refit it slowly into a Crusader composition so that I can get a flank off instead, and take advantage of the Crusader's speed, mobility, and then high DPS once it gets access to the rear armor. And I'm fairly confident that once you get access to the rear armor, the Crusader will actually kill an enemy tank faster than the Grant, because you don't have to concern yourself as much with bounces like the Grant has to deal with on like the Panthers and other heavies. But the Grant, obviously, better anti-infantry capabilities, healthier, beefier tank than the Crusader, and less risky overall. Less risky, I would say. So great vehicle. Definitely going to put it up in the strong category for that reason. 17 pounder. I have mixed feelings about the 17 pounder. I think it's okay. There's a lot of very strong artillery options that by the time this thing comes out kind of make it quite a bit of a liability, and you have to play very conservatively with it to make the most of it. I'm thinking, I'm finding like in a lot of games, if I'm playing against Axis heavy armor, like the Archer might be a better choice because it's more mobile. And so I'll go for the Australian battle group for that reason. But yeah, I think relatively speaking, the 17 pounder is just okay. Obviously, this thing is also still very finicky to transport because of the requirement on transporting it with a truck. I don't think any other British unit can transport the 17 pounder, unlike the 88, which can be transported by a 250 for DAC, which make it much more mobile and responsive. And so the truck really kind of holds this thing back. The towing component holds this thing back, and it's very difficult to escape like the Stuka, Nebel barrages, etc. when you've got something as fragile as the truck trying to pull it out of the threat zone. And so for that reason, I'm not building a lot of 17 pound. So that effectively takes us to the end of the British base roster. We do have here a couple of the new British structures. As far as the MG Nest go for the British, I actually think these things are in a great spot. They have a great firing arc. They're relatively cheap and great for fortifying areas of the map that are a lot less busy. So I think the recent buffs this patch to them was really, really nice and something that they needed. They were way too expensive before. It was like the same cost or maybe even a little bit more than a Vickers, which made no sense. So they're in a very good spot now. I love using these to lock down flanks, planting mines around them to prevent my opponent from kind of coming in with a vehicle and trying to take them out. This is a great way to kind of fortify your flanks and not break the bank or spend population on doing so. These HMG nests are solid. And this is the 25 pounder. For those of you that couldn't tell, this is the base artillery. that is very, I mean, I'm putting it in OP. The 25 pounder now has incredible scatter, rate of fire, and very low cooldown. This thing got some major buffs in the last patch. And when you consider the cost to use it, it's 35 munitions, which is less than, not less than, it's 5 more munitions than a rifle grenade, for context. So when I have the choice between throwing a grenade and firing 8 shells from a base howitzer, I'm taking the howitzer, you know? And this is also what is making recce sections so strong in their current state, because they can kind of continuously call this in place of grenades. It has very good accuracy. It's basically like on par with using a bishop barrage. It fires 8 shells. Unless you get Indian artillery, then it fires even more. And a very low cooldown, very low cost. I think this thing needs some nerfs to be made more balanced. I would like to see the cost go up and the cooldown if it's going to continue to perform at its current power level. Now, in team games, big team games, this is going to be worse because it does have scatter, which means the farther it fires, the less accurate it's going to be. But even in team game context, it's still like pretty consistent at hitting enemy team weapons on the front line. And so I've been using it a lot. I've been using this ability a lot on the Dingo, on recce sections. It is very strong and very cheap. So very, very happy with 5 pounder in its current state, but I think it needs more cooldown and a cost increase per use, to be honest. So yeah, that is the end of the base roster. Let's jump into the battle groups now. So talking about Indian artillery first. I think by many, this is considered probably to be the weakest battle group currently. I'm still a big fan of it. I think it's really, really strong. I think there's great elements to it. I am using this when I play team games as UKF. This is my favorite by far. I love using this one because I just love using artillery. I mean, when I play team games, I'm usually a little bit more relaxed than I am in like a 2v2 or 1v1 setting. And so I just love playing with artillery, and this just makes the absolute most of that. So let's break down the individual trees. So talking about the artillery support tree, I don't think the 4.2 is in a good state. I'm not going to talk too much about why. It has really bad scatter. It's very expensive. And obviously this thing is very easy to decrew by Nebels, by Stuka. It's decent for the early game. But like I said, I would much rather just make my way to the Bishop, which is going to come out a little bit later and be way, way better than this Mortar. I think the cooldown on the barrages are long. Unfortunately, the flare has a very long cooldown, and then the airburst barrage not being on a separate cooldown also kind of hurts this thing. So I think like the 4.2, it's not in a great spot. I don't usually recommend this. Half the reason I picked this battle group is for this. And sorry, it's not the off-map airburst barrage. I don't know why it says that, but what it is actually is, I believe it's called artillery or saturation fire, something like that. That is like the actual name of the ability. Has the right icon here, and you can see here it just increases the number of shells on mobile artillery units and on artillery and mortar units by 3, which is really great. When you're putting this on a BL5, I believe it fires either 12 or 13 shells, which is like 60 seconds, I think, of consecutive fire, maybe even longer. I probably should have timed it, but it's nonstop, the barrages. And then obviously as you're hitting in place sections, so areas with bunkers or fortified positions, those extra shells are really, really nice, help you get more value out of your artillery units. The synergy between this and the Bishops is just crazy good, and as well as the BL5. Off-map airburst, this is excellent for targeting team weapons specifically, or infantry blobs that you've managed to bog down with machine gun fire or what have you, and a great deterrent if your opponent is doing a concentrated attack in an area to try and clear out the infantry targets or the team weapons. Then generally I'm going for BL5 because I think it's novel, I think it's fun, I love this thing. It is very purpose-built and very different from the Bishop, and I'll talk about how. So the BL5, the more I play with it, the less of it I build. The Bishop, generally speaking, is just better. It has I believe it has a better damage drop-off, which means it deals more damage further away from the blast radius than the BL5 does. I can only say this from an anecdotal standpoint, just based on my observation of these two units. The BL5 seems to be much better at consistently decrewing weapons, and that also that is tied to rate of fire as well, because the BL5 fires very slowly. But the BL5 is really great for consistent fire against defensive positions, bunker areas, staging areas for your Axis opponents. It makes it really good in team games because of its range, because you never really have to worry about it getting counter barraged if you place it far enough back. I had that game I was talking about where I played like mostly artillery in a 4v4. I think I'll just upload it, honestly. It was a good game. It managed to kill two Stukas in one shot because it was Vet 3, which was crazy. Very lucky shot for me. I was firing at a repair station that the opponents had placed, and I managed to pick up two Stukas that were getting repaired. So it was really nice. Anyway, long-winded way of saying BL5 is, I find, fun, but the bishops are general purpose, much better, more useful than the BL5. Now, on the other side of the tree, Warcry, Valor, both excellent options. The way that I've been using Warcry in team games is in combination with Pillage, because your infantry squads fighting infantry is gonna, they're gonna kill infantry units, and they're gonna give you munitions that you can use to feed back into Warcry, and just give your guys crazy offensive power. This is especially good with like Gurkhas. I mean, it's good with every unit really because of the rate of fire bonuses and the speed. Also allows you to like outmaneuver barrages from your opponent, or position effectively against team weapons, or get around machine guns for flanking. This ability is very good, and in combination with Pillage, I think it's even better in a team game setting. So I've been using this a lot recently. If you're not planning on dumping munitions into Warcry and you want to save it for off-map barrage, mines, weapon upgrades, etc., Valor is a great option as well. It's going to prevent you from losing a lot more squads because of the damage reduction. I'm not really generally using the offensive bonuses that often because they take 3 casualties to trigger, which usually means like your unit's getting pretty low by that point anyways. It's kind of risky to stay. But on Gurkhas, it triggers at three men, which is pretty good. But yeah, this is a great passive to kind of protect your units and help reduce the probability of losing them on retreat. That's really, I see, the main use case for Valor. And obviously it's free, so that's really nice as well. Gurkhas are the best anti-infantry unit, I think. Let me think about this. Yeah, I think they're the best anti-infantry unit that the UKF have access to. Bren Gun is the best general purpose upgrade. Thompson is good for CQC. But I find, it's much better to use the Bren Gun generally speaking, because you can more consistently use the Gurkhas and you can fight with them from cover. Whereas with the Thompsons, you usually have to expose them and get really close to your opponent, which can be dangerous sometimes. But yeah, really huge fan of the Gurkhas. IL Gurkhali, excellent ability, especially if you're playing against an opponent that's blobbing. This ability is awesome because it reduces the accuracy a lot. 40% reduced accuracy of nearby enemy infantry. And that's going to help you deter pushes from opponents' blobs and juggling the... If you have 2 Gurkhas, like juggling the cooldown on this, when your enemy is pushing into you with an infantry blob, is really, really nice. So, huge fan of the Gurkhas. Grenade Assault, Smoke Grenade, very, very nice as well. Very nice upgrades on. And actually, I think I'm just noticing this. I want to make sure that I'm not seeing. Let's do Tommy against the Gurkha. I think what I just saw was... Yeah, sorry. So... Oh, okay. Sections have much worse accuracy moving than other line units. A lot of line units have the 0.75 multiplier. In the UK squads, only the Webley guy has better moving accuracy. Let's compare that to like Grenadier. Who's Rifleman? Riflemen have. Yes, they do. What about Panzer Grenadiers? Grenadiers, also better moving accuracy. Good to know. Grenadiers, sections, not good on the move. Panzer Grenadiers and Riflemen, much better. Good to know. Very good to know. For some reason, I thought they all had 0.75, but I was wrong. Okay, backtracking. Getting back on course here. So, going back to our tree on Indian reserves, then that takes us to pillage and volunteer infantry. Kind of like I talked about, if you're using a lot of Warcry, I think pillage is a good option. But if you're not, generally volunteer infantry is going to be better because it's gonna help you on the manpower rate. That's the main thing. So overall, I think Mortar, bad. Honestly, not good at all. Gurkhas, very, very strong. Probably not OP. Part of the reason sections are in OP is because of how accessible they are, their passives, synergy with training, and then rifle grenades and recce artillery is what really pushes them over the line. Gurkhas are just a fantastic anti-infantry unit. Again, great for using for blob control as well. So overall, I think like as far as this battle group's performance goes, it's probably just average, or it's probably I think, you know, I think this is a very like it's a very competitive choice in team games, especially if you're playing artillery heavy. This is the best battle group for that. If you're playing artillery heavy. And sorry, I forgot about the BL5. We'll put the BL5 up here. BL5 is average as far as emplacements go. There are definitely emplacements that are worse than the BL5. But it has an identity. The identity that it has is much more focused on dismantling static fortifications and long-range consistent artillery saturation, whereas the Bishop is more used for like precision strikes, trying to take out enemy units, and being much more precise in its targeting as well. Okay, that takes us to Aaron C. So Aaron C, we'll talk about here. So we've got the Royal Air Force call-in. Here we have commandos. We'll talk a little bit more about commandos. The support commando, M1 pack howitzer drop, incendiary bombing run, and the anti-tank loiter. This battle group is in a pretty good spot as well, especially for team games. Mainly tied to the late game abilities and the supply surplus. I mean, I think these are the cheapest versions of resource caches that you can get. And the fact that you can build them without requirement or taxing from your engineer unit, and just being able to kind of plop these up all over your side of the map is excellent in team games and going to create a massive snowballing resource advantage for you and for your team. So if you're playing this battle group, I would definitely be the person that is kind of like designated to build these caches, because you can build them quickly and you get them at a discount compared to your teammate. Continuing down the Royal Navy support, Centaur, I'm not going to talk about. I frankly just haven't used it in this patch because I just don't think it's in a good spot, because it's in tier 4. And all of the units that it competes with, like the Crusader and the other late game tanks, are just better. It is a little bit more like unique in terms of its identity. It still fills that anti-infantry role, but it's less of like an infantry support tank like the Matilda is. And it's just much more mobile in that capacity. Deals decent AoE damage. It's kind of like a big version of the Scott tank for US. But overall, I just don't think it's worth it compared to the other options that UK has in tier 4. And so for that reason, I'm not going to say much more about it. Both assault flares and naval bombardment are awesome late game abilities for both team games. For team games, I would say. Naval bombardment obviously just obliterates any static position, and will completely kill any targets in the blast radius within a couple of volleys. And then assault flares is really nice for a big team push, because it's going to benefit your teammates in the sense that it's going to give them vision of all of the frontline territories to help you get the right kind of information as you're making a big push. And then obviously the infantry bonuses to your troops are very, very nice. It makes them super fast, great rate of fire bonus, similar to Warcry. But Warcry a little bit more on the offensive side and doesn't give the flares. That's the main difference between. Royal Air Force commando sections have been playing with a lot recently, trying to get the hang of them. I still think this is kind of it's an over. It's not a great unit. It's fun. These guys are so much fun to use, and there are ways to use them effectively, but they are very micro intensive, very taxing, very difficult to trigger the ambush bonus as well because of how they need to basically close the gap and get into short range to get the most out of it. But that's also how you get detected. So it's kind of like really kind of it's difficult to use these guys very effectively, but they're a lot of fun. The Mills bombs are decent. Sticky bombs are fine to help them escape or deter light vehicles. The concealment smoke is a great way to break suppression and or get in situations where you want to kind of like reset after a bad engagement, but don't want to have to retreat back to base. Using the concealment smoke and then backing away and trying to find a place to hide so that you can start to skulk around again and find an ambush position is the best way to use concealment smoke. And then, of course, the passive healing on them is kind of nice out of combat because, again, it helps their staying power on the field. But yeah, CQC, like, they're very good. They have very, very high damage at CQC. I mean, I'll compare them quickly here to, like, we'll do them to, like, an Assault Grenadier. So you guys can see the difference. The commandos are definitely better. You can see, yeah, dramatically better CQC damage. Also higher health than the Assault Grenadier squad. They will beat anything at short range, to my knowledge. I don't think there's any unit that can beat them at short range on the Axis side. But the difficulty is getting them into position without taking too much damage or losing them. And obviously, you know, once you ambush with them, you really have to commit and try to make the most of the engagement because it takes a long time to set up those opportunities to try to take out units. And that's what you want to do, right? You want to find opportunities to isolate units and to pick them off with these guys. I've also had good success planting demos on known retreat paths for units. So this can be like near a building that your opponent is going to have to run by or through a choke point. That can be a really, really great way to kind of like finish off an opponent that's retreating. And that's the best way I find to generally use these demo packages. Or on, you know, the friendly side of a building that your opponent wants to get access to, as soon as they jump inside, sometimes you can get the jump on them by blowing up the squad right as they get in the building. So the demo packages can be very nice as well for that reason. But yeah, I would say like in the right hands, this unit is strong, but generally speaking, it's average because of how difficult it is to use. And that takes us to we'll talk about the back to the rest to talk about the M1 pack howitzer. This unit's terrible. I would never use this. Bishop, you know, if you want artillery, Bishop is the way to go. This thing is not in a good place right now. Big liability, relatively expensive. Not worth it. Not worth building, I think. Commando support section is pretty good. They have very good long range damage. They also get access to the ambush bonus with the Vickers LMG, which is really nice. And if you have commandos on the map, you're playing a team game, it can be nice to have one of these guys on the front line because you can pull these guys, soft retreat them back and get some reinforcements in and then kind of go back in and go deep into enemy lines while you focus on using this guy more on the front line with your sections. The air barrage, the Hawker strafing run is pretty good. It does deal good damage against infantry and light vehicles, but it is kind of difficult to catch out your opponent with this. It is good at like suppressing, you know, if you identify like some team weapons, you want to apply pressure to it without closing in. That can be, the Hawker strafing run can be very good for that. But it doesn't deal like a crazy amount of damage. But anyway, overall, like decent, you know, I love the identity of this unit, and this ability is pretty decent in how it's used. But yeah, it's overall the unit is pretty good. I think I prefer standard commandos now after using a bunch of both of them. But this guy, he's okay. He's not bad. And I think if you're planning on using commandos, it's actually a good idea to get one of these for the purpose of being able to pull them back and retreat your commando squad and then trying to sneak your way back into enemy territory. So going back to the end of the tree here, these are kind of like your awesome late game abilities. The anti-tank rocket loader is much better than it was last patch. They added some scatter to it. So if you're fighting enemy tank blobs especially, this is very good because the scatter on the rockets will kind of guarantee that it's going to hit like all over an area and deal damage to a bunch of different units, which is really nice. It will deal consistent damage to big blobs and tanks. Actually, maybe I'll just quickly try to showcase it in game. Now, the main gripe about this was how difficult it was to hit moving targets, because basically by the time the run was coming in, the target was already in a place where it was able to avoid the fire altogether on it. And so that was the main criticism of it. But now, like with, you know, tank blobs being super, super common, we'll just use P4s here for the purpose of our... shoot down the plane. And again, that's also kind of the weakness of this ability at the moment is anti-aircraft weaponry is so commonplace for Axis that it's kind of difficult to get these in a good place. Back up. So this is kind of like the behavior that you can, you know, maybe expect to see. Obviously not exactly like this, but I think like here, these will be tanks. Yeah, so the main criticism was like it was too hard to hit vehicles that were on the move. And now with the scatter, you can see on the rockets, like it's going to deal damage all over the place. And that means that, especially if your opponent is blobbing their tanks in any capacity, they're going to be much easier for the Hawkers to hit and deal damage to. You can see here, like decent scatter, you know, hitting the targets that are kind of all over the place, shooting at the stug, but like kind of hitting everything here. So it's really, really good at killing the super heavies because they're much slower as well. The scatter on the rockets is very good. And also blobs of enemy tanks. So I'm a big fan of the changes to this ability. I think it's in a pretty good state now that they've made some changes to it. And so I'm of the ability now. I've been using the bombing run less often, but I think if your opponent's doing heavily on team weapons or fortifications, the incendiary bombing run is a great choice. This will very quickly flush out their team weapons or bunker positions and allow you to kind of close in and capitalize on an attack. So both of these late game options are I think, very good. So overall, Air and Sea, I think, again, I'll probably put it in the average category. Actually, no, sorry, this is strong. This is strong because of the implications for team games. But yeah, it's in a very good spot, especially for team games, I would say. Harder to execute in 1v1s, especially with the commandos and how expensive they are, but they're in a very good place. This unit we talked about, not in a good spot. This is a pretty bad unit. And then I think, you know, like how this thing performs, it's okay, but I think there are just much better tier 4 options for UKF. And so for that reason, I'm going to put it in the okay category. Now on to armored. Armored, I think probably in a good spot. One of the top 3 British battle groups, in my opinion. So quickly, just kind of going through these. So on the heavy armor support side, we've got vehicle training and engineer detachments. Engineer detachments are great if you're planning on building more than 2 sappers or have to replace them. The reduced reinforcement cost and deployment time is really, really nice. And obviously, you know, if you're building a lot of sappers or planning to build a lot of sappers, I mean, that's what you should be doing if you're planning to go for this battle group and use this this passive. In games where I'm getting engineered detachments, I'm usually going like 3-4 sappers. I think it's much more useful to do that in 1v1s, as it's kind of harder to use sappers in big team games and like close the gap before losing them. So in team games, generally, I think I'd go for rigorous vehicle training more frequently. And this can be good with, you know, all your light vehicles, your mid-game, late-game vehicles, and it also stacks with the training elements. So your vehicle training options as well, this will stack with that and help you get access to those veterancy, the veterancy bonuses earlier, which is great. Forward repair assembly, I love. I think this is a fantastic and underrated ability. I don't see enough of these in team games, especially when there's a lot of vehicles on the field. You know, the area of effect ability to repair your teammates' vehicles and your own is just awesome, and it really is going to help you maximize the uptime on your vehicles. And then we're looking at like the Churchills and the Black Prince. Churchills, I kind of feel similar to the way that I do with the Matilda, just because of the meta's current state. These Churchills are more difficult to use, and it's really tough to like close games out with Churchills because they're mostly designed to take damage because they're not super mobile. And then obviously as the bigger cats come out from the Axis, these are going to also be difficult to use. Because the big cats are just going to tear them apart. Like KT, you know, KT is not going to stand up against Churchills, even a few of them. Or sorry, the KT is gonna work its way through Churchills fairly quickly. And so I think like with all the big cats and the meta in the current state with Martyrs being much more present, these are tough to use. And Prince, I kind of feel the same for the same reason. But in a 1v1 setting, I think both of these kind of have their place. I mean, if you have this, choosing this over the Matilda, I think is a better choice. It has better anti-infantry fighting capabilities. And it will swipe models away from squads faster than a Matilda will, I think. And it has better armor. Better armor against handheld infantry, against AT guns, against enemy armor. Churchill is just better. Prince is in a really nice spot now with all the changes and the bonuses that it got from the most recent patch. Immunity to shock is really, really nice. Makes it more difficult to lock down. Much higher rate of fire, which is going to make it good at trading with Panthers, the KT, the Tiger. But I think still, you know, again, because of the meta and the current state that it's in, it is kind of difficult to use this super effectively outside of a 1v1 setting. Because it's such a big priority target, it can be very easy for your opponents to kind of lock down and kill. Whereas like, you know, a mass of smaller tanks that are less expensive might be a safer strategy overall. Generally, how I feel about heavy tanks is probably a comment worth making. How I feel about heavy tanks is these are capstone units. This is the last unit that you put into your roster, meaning you should have lots of other units to support a good composition, a rounded composition prior to this thing showing up. I've talked to some coaching students who are like, oh, you know, I'm just making my way to the Churchill, and then the Churchill is like my call in, and then I win the game. And it just doesn't work out that way. Because it's a single target, it's very easy for your opponent to focus on, lock down, disable, and kill. And so volumes of medium tanks, especially for UK forces, like, you know, a few Crusaders is much better than a Black Prince. But, you know, if you're at a point in the game where you're like pretty close to pop cap, then maybe you have an engagement, opens up some population, you have the resources to float, then you can bring in a church for like a killing blow push. That is a great way to be using the Prince. But this should never be the only tank in your roster because that is the fastest way to lose it for sure. That's generally my thoughts about the heavy tanks in general, but specifically the Prince as well. Field support and logistics, light vehicle withdraw and refit. I've talked about this before. I have a how-to on this specific battle group that articulates like how to use this ability really effectively. You can create some incredible tempo with the mid-game and early game vehicles from UK forces by consistently refitting them into what's better. So, you know, refitting your Humber into Stuarts, and then Stuarts, once you get tier 4, you can refit them for free into the tier 4 tanks. It's really, really nice. You can also build an early game Dingo and then refit it into another infantry section or whatever else you're going to spend that manpower on. So this ability is really nice. Between Radionet and AA Crusader, I'm a bigger fan of Radionet because of the implications for my late game armor. This is a really nice bonus for armor in the late game, and like I mentioned, similar problem to the Centaur. I would say this is better in terms of performance. It is definitely way more lethal against infantry than even the Crusader 2 is, or the Matilda. It does very consistent damage to infantry, whereas the other tanks have a propensity to miss sometimes and deal no damage in between shots. But this thing is very accurate, does very consistent area of effect damage. And so I've seen these used to great effect. And with their mobility, they're also in a very, very good position. But in general, you know, when I'm thinking about whether I want to build an AA Crusader or a standard Crusader, I just opt for the standard Crusader because obviously I can get some anti-tank capabilities out of that, and this thing just doesn't have that. Then we've got some awesome late game options in terms of abilities from Recon Artillery and Designate Targets. Designate Targets is basically a giant version of the Mark Target area for the Humber that we talked about earlier, except it also gives an increased penetration, and it's led by a tank. This is probably one of the best recon tools in the game because it gives the extra or the easier to hit element. And great to use on offensive pushes or defensive maneuvers with your teammates. It's going to make everything in that area easier to hit, easier to kill, easier to penetrate. So this is probably the best late game option in a team game setting especially. Recon Artillery a little more situational and good for late game pushes as well. It's twice as expensive as Designate Targets, which is why I actually favor Designate Targets. But this is going to drop a recon bombardment on your opponent's team weapons, and this is great for setting up late game pushes against team weapon heavy compositions especially. Just sowing chaos in your opponent's backline. That's when you want to be using this, is when you're doing big attacks. Otherwise, you know, if you use this kind of standalone, it's very easy to dodge, very easy to avoid, and so making sure that you're following up on using this ability is really, really important. So overall, Armored Battlegroup, I think it's in a strong state for sure in terms of where it fits into the meta. Definitely one of the better, probably the top 3 for 1v1 battle groups. I think it's right up there next to these two, which we'll talk about in a second. AA Crusader, I think it's in an average position, but kind of just outshined by a lot of the other tier 4 options for UK forces. Like I said, good lethality against infantry, but you know, it lacks obviously any kind of anti-tank capabilities, so that's really the main drawback of it. Churchill, I feel like in an okay position, kind of similar to the Matilda, but maybe a little bit better. It's a little bit more expensive and also slower, but has kind of the same problems as the Matilda does. Prince, I also kind of feel like in the average category because of it's. I mean, no, that's not true. It's a strong tank individually, but it's just very easy to shut down. That's its main issue. And that's kind of been its issue, but with the buffs, it's definitely much better than it was, and it's a great tank duelist. It will, you know, pretty handily take care of Panthers or other mediums at this point. But it's and it's got a good Vet 1 option. So here, let's actually crack it open really quickly and talk about the new Vet 1 they introduced for it. Units. Right, let's go to the Prince. So it's got this is the right one. Emergency combat repairs is really nice. So as they are out of combat, no, don't have to be out of combat. Okay, so they can do emergency combat repairs. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, definitely great to use like if you're activating the smoke. And then the heavy track armor is very nice on it because it makes it much more immune to shots from the side. I actually think they increased the armor. This is there it is. This is the real one. Yeah, so very, very heavy frontal and side armor on the Black Prince now. Infantry support smoke, great cover for it as well. And yeah, it's a great tank duelist. It does respectable damage to infantry as well, but it is more geared towards the tank duelist role. And again, I would think of this, if I were you guys, I would think of this as a capstone unit. I think that's really important. Not over investing or, you know, withholding resources for this. If you have no other vehicles in your composition, you're gonna have a hard time doing what you need to do with this tank because of its slow speed, and it's very easy to kind of isolate and pick off. Right, so that takes us to Aussies, Australian battle group. So this is, I think, probably debatably the best battle group in the UK forces tree. We'll talk about why. So starting with the left side's logistical supremacy, the supply truck run is excellent. I mean, using this in the most on the most accessible fuel or munitions point to your base is a great way to build additional resource tempo if you happen to have spare manpower in the early game. And you know, obviously much easier to protect than going long distances. When we look at these two options, I don't think artillery tripwire flares are really worth the munitions that you spend on them at the moment, because the scatter on this can be a little bit questionable, and it doesn't do that much damage. And especially if you're playing team games, like, I don't know, maybe this could be, you know what, this could be really good in a team game. But again, it's a flare in a single shell, so I don't know. It's kind of mixed feelings about that. Strength and economy is probably better. If you're not playing air and sea, this is the next best choice for strengthening economy, just for you and for your teammates, because the cost is reduced and the health on them is increased, which is really nice. And then, of course, you have Creeping Charge Barrage and the Archer Tank Destroyer. I think the Creeping Charge Barrage is probably a bit of a trap. It's really difficult to use this and actually land on your opponent, because obviously they're going to see the red smoke. And then, generally speaking, like, once they see the first couple shells land, they know which direction it's going. And so it's very easy to reposition and get out of this thing. So I'm not using this that often. I'm usually opting for the Archer Tank Destroyer. And combined with Over Repair, this thing is a very solid option to some of those late game cats. Does very, very high damage as well, which is really nice. And now it can fire on the move, which it couldn't previously do. So that's very nice as well. On the right side, this is where the rubber meets the road and really the strength of the Australian Battlegroup shines. Australian Lights, just exceptional line infantry substitute. These guys function a lot more like riflemen in the early game, so I want to compare them for you guys so you can see. Looking at the Australians versus the Tommies, you can see the Aussies much better CQC damage than the Tommies have. And they also have access to the snipe ability, which is really nice and scales really well with them. Here, I'll crack open the unit card so we can talk about it. So the sharpshooter ability marks the target, and then as you scale up with veterancy, you can see here version 1 and version 2, or this is the vet 2. It says moderate damage. Oh, there we go. Kills a single soldier. And then there's a Vet 3 sharpshooter training where it's going to potentially instantly kill an enemy soldier that's at low health. This is like an execute, similar to what the Jaegers had in COH3, and I think Pathfinders had this also. So this is brought over to the Aussies, makes them really excellent late game scaling units. And one thing I wanted to call out that I learned about Aussies recently is they are the only line unit that I'm aware of. I looked at Jaegers, Panzer Grenadiers, Riflemen, sections. I even looked at like Stoßtruppen and like some of those other units. This is the only unit that gets another harder to hit bonus at Vet 2 that I could find. I couldn't find any others. Tightrope maybe will come in here and correct me, but to my knowledge, and I think this is part of what makes them so strong, especially at pushing in the early game. And then in the late game, that's when you want to upgrade these to the Scopely Enfields and kind of convert their role from more like rifleman type units to longer range and much more effective recon and long range fighting units. Let's do scoped. You can see here how the damage curve to be much more in line with how sections perform. They lose a little bit of their, actually let's just do side by side. They lose a little bit of their close range damage, but you can see their long range damage gets much better, much better. And generally that's how you want to use these guys in the late game anyways, is the longer the game goes on, the more dangerous it is to get in the face of your opponent. And so that's kind of when you want to start using these the Scopely Enfields instead. So I wouldn't recommend upgrading these too early if you want to use them more aggressively. Just know that there's a bit of a trade-off that you're dealing with if you upgrade these to the Scopely Enfields. But they also get more vision, which is really nice. So that's something to pay attention to. And like other line units, like the Rifleman, like the DAC Panzer Grenadier, these guys have the extra moving accuracy on their Lee Enfields, which is also nice. So Aussie, very, very strong. Obviously, oh, I almost forgot. They have the ability to build these Sangar walls, field defenses, which also makes them really, really nice, especially in the late game, being able to build the emplacements, build tank traps, sand guard walls in the late game is really nice for them. And it's going to help your late game scaling and fortification capabilities a lot more. And they also have a faster capture speed. I almost forgot to mention this. They have a faster capture speed that also scales with veterancy. It's not actually listed here in the bonus. Unless they took it away, I would be surprised. But yeah, they have a faster capture speed than other, which in a 1v1 setting makes these guys so much better too, because they really help with that early game tempo that you can sometimes lack if you're playing as UK forces. But yeah, they are like probably one of the best line units next to, I mean, sections are excellent as well. Aussies are right up there with them in terms of power, relatively speaking, and scaling over the course of the game. I think these guys actually scale better than standard sections do, because they get access to some extra speed, and then obviously with the Scopely Enfields, and then the late game potential of Vet 3 sharpshooter training, very, very nice, especially when combined with the snipe ability. So awesome unit, super strong. Next, we've got defensive tactics and the 2-pounder. I don't really recommend defensive tactics because of how susceptible it makes you to enemy artillery. The 2-pounder is amazing. This is like my favorite AT gun. It's got a faster setup time than all the other AT guns. It's got a very wide arc, and the Vet 1 ability on it is completely busted. Target weak point. So it reduces speed by 50%, disables enemy weapons, and it always penetrates, which is frankly ridiculous. The fact that you can pretty much completely shut down a Tiger, King Tiger, Panther, whatever, easily through the front with a couple of these bad boys in training just makes them so dangerous and so scary to fight against. They're super annoying. So yeah, I think they need a nerf low-key. But this unit is one of the highlights of the battle group. And obviously, because they come out super early, it's also a great answer to the DAC 250 or other heavy light vehicle play. Again, due to their quick setup time, rate of fire as well. So they do have lower damage than standard AT guns, but they have a faster rate of fire to compensate. So they're much better against light vehicles. And like I mentioned, as long as you're spamming this target weak point ability in the late game, they're still very effective against heavier vehicles as well. When you're using this, obviously. So yeah, we talked about the 2-pounder, and we'll take it back to the tree here. And then finally, defensive tactics we talked about. Hold the line, excellent if you're playing super team weapon heavy and with defensive tactics. The heal on your team weapons, on your infantry in combat, reduce damage. Like if you're playing Vickers and team weapon heavy, this ability is great. Even if you're playing heavy AT guns, like you have a lot of AT guns, your opponent's playing with a lot of vehicles, sometimes this is a better choice than vehicle over repair. I think people kind of forget that. If you're getting dove a lot by light vehicles, this can be really nice because the damage reduction and healing in combat is going to allow you to kind of fight off those light vehicles or last longer while you buy time for help. And then, of course, we've got vehicle over repair, the extra 120 health. I don't think I need to say how strong or how useful this is. It's so good, especially on Crusaders in the late game. It just turns them from a fragile medium tank into a standard medium tank. So this is really, really nice. And the fact that you can use this on your teammates' vehicles, don't forget, very, very nice way to keep everything in good shape and topped up. And it also, over repairing, for example, like your bishops, if you've gone for bishops, is a great way to protect them from counter barrage, where you can potentially lose them in 2 shots. The vehicle over repair will save them from that as well. So both great options. So Australian battle group, definitely in the S tier. 2-pounder is going to go up there. I think this is supposed to be the 17-pounder version. Kind of feel the same about that. Defensive tactics, not bad overall. That this includes the Bofors. The Bofors is good at placing behind your lines if you're dealing with a lot of aircraft, but honestly, the Axis aircraft got gutted so hard, like I don't really think it's worth it. Yeah, Aussies definitely in the OP tier in terms of infantry. They're right up there with sections in a very, very good spot. And then the Archer, I think also very good mobile tank destroyer. If you're feeling the need for the 17-pounder in any game and you have access to the Australian battle group, I would honestly just suggest going for this instead, because obviously it's going to be much easier to maneuver around than towing a 17-pounder. So there you have it. This truck's not supposed to be there. Lastly, we take it to the newest battle group, the Canadian Shock battle group. I'm a huge fan of this one. Super unique. Really, really good abilities, really good units in it. Let's break it down. Shock Assault, starting with the Shock Assault tree. Attacking Spirit and Offensive Resupply. Both of these abilities are fantastic. The more I play, the more I'm actually favoring Offensive Resupply. The fact that you can build a bunch of sections and then just stack all of their abilities during the Offensive Resupply period, like the fact that I can throw the you can throw the 25-pounder artillery for free when you have this passive, and you can fire a rifle grenade, and you can throw a snare, all while this passive is active, which is crazy, and you spend no munitions on it, which is just bananas. So this is very, very good, and I think even probably more so for team games in general. Attacking Spirit probably better in 1v1 setting where territory is changing hands a lot more often, and you build tempo by getting this. But Offensive Resupply, probably a better choice in team games, generally speaking. Canadian Shocks. These guys are, they're a little expensive, I think. The more I play with them, the more I start to feel like that. They have exceptional scaling. The Piat is a little bit difficult to use because it has a very long aim time, which makes your opponent, it's very easy for your opponent to notice you targeting a vehicle with the Piat package and then just be able to get out before we actually get the shot off. But these guys are perfect for anti-dive compositions where you're worried about your opponent like running your AT guns over or something like that, because they fight infantry very effectively at mid and close range. I'll actually pull them up here so you guys can compare them to Australians so you can see. The Canadians, you know, slightly better than Australians at close and mid range, but actually fall off worse than Aussies at long range, which is interesting. But yeah, they also have access to the Gammon bombs and the Piat package, and then they also have access to the 2-inch mortar package, which is decent. I find myself generally building the Piat more frequently because the anti-tank, it's really like the one thing that the UK composition is lacking the most is great handheld anti-tank options, and that's what the Canadians really bring to bear here. And also they have access to, obviously, synergy with incendiary munitions. Their light gammon bomb is the best grenade in the game. And, of course, they get access to these nice passives, Grenade Rush and the Assault Rush. This is really, really nice. Wait, Grenade Rush? I think it's Assault Rush. I don't know why there's two here. That's funny. Yeah, they get the Assault Rush, which gives them the extra damage reduction and speed, which allows them to kind of close the gap for fighting. And that has great synergy with the 2-inch mortar. So if you're playing, like, you know, you've got plenty of anti-tank weapons, and you want to use the 2-inch mortar, it's got great synergy with that, especially with offensive resupply, because you can use this ability for free, which is really good. Yeah, but Canadians overall pretty solid unit, I would say. But again, very expensive. The Piat can prove to be a bit of a liability, but otherwise they're in a really good state. They're very strong. They're in a good spot. That takes us to our last tree of options here. Point Assault, I don't really think this is worth it right now. I think the smoke operation is much better. Using this in combination with big offensive pushes against team weapons and enemy vehicles, especially when your opponent's got like big immobile cats, this is perfect, because especially if you're going mass Crusaders, this allows you to get right on top of them, and it makes, like we talked about with smoke earlier, it makes it very difficult to use handheld AT, any kind of AT, honestly, because you have to start attack grounding through the smoke, which is just difficult to do against targets that are moving quickly. So going for mass Crusaders with a big smoke operation is a great way to just totally dismantle your opponent, even if they're well prepared for a push, because the smoke will basically just disorient them so much that it's very difficult for them to properly respond to your attack. So I'm a huge fan of this ability. I think it's one of the best late game abilities, and it's relatively cheap. Next, we've got incendiary weapons. Burnout, this is pretty good right now. I think this could be made a little bit better. I don't really like the fact that it's 2 CPs at the moment, but I can see the implications and the usefulness in team games, especially being able to cut off territory with this. I'm generally opting more for incendiary munitions, which obviously have great, I talked about, great synergy with rifle grenades, just incredible synergy with rifle grenades. The 2-inch mortar, obviously from the Canadians, it has great synergy with. And then, of course, leaving a patch behind any grenade damage just makes the explosives that the UK forces have access to that much more devastating. And I've seen like hitting a rifle grenade on like a flak 30, it just completely shuts, like dismantles the crew. Like they have to run away because they can't stay in the fire, and they certainly can't tank it because they'll just die. Incendiary munitions, really great, probably the best option. Pyrotechnics, this is actually way better than I thought it was. The infantry-based flamethrowers, especially the synergy with the demolition engineering, which we'll talk about, the fact that it reduces accuracy that I learned recently, I think is nuts, and it's very, very strong. Gonna allow your sappers and your flamer-based weapon squads to trade much better. And then obviously the as well as the area of effect slow that you get on infantry, which is really nice to close the gap with your Canadians with as well. This ability is just great. It's very, very good. And the fact that it blinds enemy units is also interesting, and probably one of the best utility points for Rock as well. But yeah, reducing speed, reducing infantry, heavy weapons, and accuracy is pretty strong effectiveness, and has great synergy with demolition engineering. So I learned recently that this upgrade, so you can buy this on your sappers once you unlock it, or you can call these sappers in. The upgrade comes with a flamethrower and allows you to also have a minesweeper on them. So it basically just turns your engineers into giga engineers. And then on top of that, it also gives a damage reduction bonus. So let's go and quickly look at sappers here. Because I believe the demolition package's description is here. Yeah, so you can see 25% damage reduction, allows the squad to be upgraded with a number 2 flamethrower, and hazard removal upgrades. If you haven't bought an upgrade, this will give you the flamethrower by default. Otherwise, if you already have the flamethrower, it will give you the wire cutters instead, or the hazard removal package. So this is a really fantastic upgrade in the late game, and frankly, I've been leaning more toward it more than the church, because the Churchill Crocodile, because I think this thing needs some buffs, and we'll talk about that. So yeah, demolition engineering, exceptional option, really, really nice late game augment for your sappers. And if you happen to lose your sappers, you can just call a couple more in for not too expensive and get some really nice power out of them with the damage reduction, the flamers, and the hazard removal package all rolled into one unit, which is really nice. The Croc. So the Croc, I think, is in a weird spot, and I think I've finally figured out how to explain why. So from what I can tell, the main issue with the Croc is that the flamethrower deals damage in a line. And what it needs is like some sort of area of effect that's bigger than what it does right now. Because as long as the opponent's units are spread out and like in an open area, it's actually really difficult to deal good, consistent damage to the whole squad. And that's, I think, what the Churchill Crocodile is really missing. Obviously, this also suffers from all the same problems that the other Churchill variants have. It's very slow. It's very susceptible to long-range anti-tank fire. And it has limited ability to duel against medium and heavy tanks. So I think like if they could fix that element of the Churchill Croc, it would be much better. I still think this has a place like in an urban setting. I think this unit could be very good, like on forgetting the names of maps now, but there are a handful of maps that have a lot of buildings consolidated in some areas, and I think the Churchill could be very, very good in those situations. But on open maps, the thing is very, very difficult to use. And like I said, as long as your opponent is properly spacing out his infantry, the flamethrower just doesn't deal that much damage to them. And I just think isn't threatening enough. I think I would rather have some of the other tanks that can chip away at these overall, Canadians I'm going to put in OP because I think they're right up there. They just have some great abilities, great late game passives, very, very good on that side. Canadians, overall strong unit. Little expensive, I think, is what keeps them from being an OP, as well as their very poor long range performance and having to close the gap. And then the Churchill Croc, probably better than the standard Churchill overall, but I still think I can't, in good conscience, put this in the strong category yet. I think the flamethrower needs a little bit of looking at to be made stronger against infantry. Maybe some AoE effect on it would be very good. But yeah, that's it, guys. That is an overview of the British. I guess this is the 2.0, the version 2 of COH3 2.0's British UKF roster. And we broke down all the battle groups as well. Overall, guys, I feel like if you're a beginner, this is the easiest faction to pick up and play. They have very versatile units, exceptional late game, exceptional infantry. Their weakest point is usually in the mid game, but you can really play into that very effectively as long as you're making good use of the training. And I do quickly want to talk about the training center here. Look at all these tanks. They almost died just from the loiter. This is no other damage. It was the loiter that did all this damage. Crazy. So looking at the training, people ask me like, hey, when should I get training and what training should I get? All of these are very good. I would say my general priority order, if I'm playing team games and I'm building bishops, I'm usually going 2 bishops into light vehicle training. If I have a Dingo, it's going to benefit that as well. But light vehicle training plus bishops, once they get to vet 1, these things are just a force of nature at that point, and they make for a really strong mid game. Like I talked about, I think once you get to your second unit of any category, like for example, once you get your double AT guns out, maybe later on in the mid game, getting team weapon training is a great way to make sure that you're keeping them alive because you've got the extra health. And then also the rate of fire bonuses is going to help you deal with those pesky Axis mid-game vehicles. Infantry training, I'm usually getting like mid to late game, sometimes after my tier 4. If I'm not building bishops, I will generally go for infantry training instead. And I will be getting this eventually because the bonuses that you get from this, the reload speed, the accuracy, and the 10% harder to hit, really just kick your infantry from like strong to OP across the board. And so very, very good to get infantry training even after you've like got to vet 1 or vet 2, like infantry training, because it's just a stacking veterancy points on top. This is going to accelerate your path to the vet 3. And you know, it's a luxury item too. Like if you're in late game and you have no pop left and you have nothing else to buy in terms of training, infantry training is great as well. And then armor training, I'd say once you're amassing 2 or 3 armored vehicles, the extra accuracy, speed, reload speed, and weapon penetration is excellent. This also stacks with, and this is important to call out. So when you build Crusaders, and I talked about this a little bit, when you build Crusaders, you go armor training. You get the armor training once when you are, when you have the Crusader 2, but then when you upgrade it, you get the experience again. Now, this is clearly a bug, but until Relic fixes this, basically what this means is that when you're preparing for vehicle dives especially, focus on the Crusaders that have not reached Vet 1 first when you're upgrading to Crusader 3. Because if you have armor training, it will make sure that all of them have access to Heroic Charge, and Heroic Charge is what makes them so good in the late game. The speed, the acceleration gets you access to that back armor of your opponent. Make sure, guys, when you're doing your late game pushes, that this is not already on cooldown. You need to make sure that you get the speed and acceleration to get behind your opponent's tanks and then maximize your DPS with the rate of fire bonus. And that's how you're going to really clear out your opponent's late game tanks, is by using the Heroic Charge bonus combined with armor training. Yeah, so that was the last point I think I wanted to make. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it. Please leave some comments down below if you feel like I missed anything, or you know, I don't know if I missed a data point or forgot to call out something important. I think, you know, it's important for us, all of us, to share knowledge, as there's a lot of new players coming in right now. But yeah, I really appreciate the viewership. I really appreciate all the subscriptions and the community that we're building on Discord. You can find that link in the description. It's awesome group of people there, playing together, learning from each other. And I'm always active in there as well. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for your support, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Oh, last question. So I'm thinking about future tier list videos. Maybe, you know, should I do like different unit types? You know, like a tank tier list or an infantry tier list or team weapon or something like that. Tell me what you guys would like to see. If you would like to see more of these kind of videos, please let me know. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Anyway, have a good one, guys, and we'll see you, nerds.